Grant came home with his coat still wet from the Denver rain, set his keys on my kitchen counter, and looked at me like the hard part had already happened somewhere else. I stood by the sink with a glass of water, waiting for the sponsor dinner excuse. The dead phone. The harmless lie married people recognize before it opens its mouth. He did not give me any of those. I am leaving with Lila. Morgan, and I need you not to make this ugly, because I already sent her the pitch deck, the release calendar, and the rough cut for episode 6. For a second, the apartment did not feel silent so much as emptied, like every sound had stepped back to see what I would do with that sentence. Grant watched my face, searching for the break he had rehearsed for. The shaking hand, the cracked voice, the wife who would chase the marriage before she understood what he had taken. I only looked at the keys beside his hand, and then at the phone in his coat pocket, because he had not confessed to falling in love. He had confessed to moving company material that did not belong to him. You sent Lila an uncleared cut, I asked, keeping my voice low enough that he had to listen instead of perform. Grant gave a small laugh, the one he used at sponsor tables when someone pushed back too early, and told me, "You always turn everything into ownership. Morgan. The show has my relationships in it. I helped build the room." He said room like it was a deed. Like shaking hands at dinners made him the author of every hour I had spent cutting tape and protecting people who trusted my name. I put the water glass down before my grip could tell him anything useful. There was no screaming in me, not because it did not hurt, but because the first clean piece of evidence had just walked into my kitchen wearing his face. Grant picked up his bag and waited for one last question. One last wound he could answer with a speech about freedom. I gave him nothing but the door, and when it closed, I reached for my laptop instead of my heart. I did not move for a full minute after Grant left, because the first mistake would matter more than the first feeling. My phone was already in my hand, but I did not call him, and I did not call Lila Hartwell, because neither needed warning. I called Reese Dalton instead, my operations lead, the one person who knew archive permission better than Grant knew his own private excuses. Grant admitted he sent Lila the sponsor pitch, the release calendar, and the uncleared cut for episode 6, I said. And Reese went quiet the way serious people do when already working. Do you want access removed or preserved? Morgan, Reese asked. And that question told me why I trusted her with the bones of the company. Preserve everything. Lock by role. Snapshot the audit logs. And do not delete a single thing, because I want every move where he left it. She answered. I am on it. And the apartment no longer felt safe, but it stopped feeling undefended. I opened the production dashboard while Reese moved through the archive from her end, and Grant's name still sat there in blue like the system had not caught up. Then the activity panel loaded, and the timestamps began telling the part Grant had left out. He had downloaded the sponsor renewal packet first, then the guest release folder, then the rough audio cut with a subject who had not signed final approval. The affair suddenly looked smaller than the folder trail, because that cut did not just carry my work. It carried someone else's trust. Reese came back quieter, keys moving under her voice, and confirmed the same sequence from her screen. He opened the share settings for 9 minutes. Morgan, then put them back like he thought the system would forget. I stared at that 9-minute window and understood what Grant had counted on, my hurt making me sloppy. My silence making me late. My marriage making me hesitate. Instead, I watched his access narrow to nothing, while the proof stayed clean enough to speak for itself. By morning, the rain had stopped, and Denver looked clean in that cruel way cities do after they watch your life split open. I sat at the kitchen counter with the production dashboard still open, drinking coffee I could barely taste, while Grant's name turned from blue to gray across every system he had treated like a personal wallet. His email stayed archived. His calendar access narrowed. His sponsor folders closed. And his co-working badge lost its permission under the same policy he had signed without reading. Nothing personal had been touched, and nothing had been hidden, because the line mattered now more than ever. Grant did not understand lines. He understood rooms, dinners, introductions, the kind of access that made people mistake proximity for ownership. By late morning, he tried logging into the sponsor dashboard from a hotel Wi-Fi network, then from his phone, then from an old browser session he must have forgotten he still had open. Each attempt failed cleanly, leaving another timestamp behind for Reese to save. I watched the alerts arrive without answering any of them, because every failed login said more than a phone call ever could. His first text came just after noon, short enough to pretend it was calm and sharp enough to show the panic underneath. "You are going to lose every sponsor if you freeze me out." I read it twice, not because it hurt, but because it proved he still thought the relationships belonged to him even after the files showed what he had taken. He had confused trust with leverage, and now he was trying to use the same sponsor names as a threat. I forwarded the message to Marin Pike without comment, then set the phone face down. By the afternoon, Grant tried the co-working office where we rented editing rooms and small meeting space near Reno. Reese sent one quiet update. Badge denied. Front desk notified. No incident beyond raised voice. I pictured him standing there with his overnight bag and that practiced half-smile, waiting for someone to recognize him as important. Nobody did. For the first time since I had built the company, Grant was not being kept out by my anger. He was being kept out by the rules he thought only applied to other people. Grant waited one day before trying to make the story public, almost patient for a man who trusted volume more than truth. His post appeared on my professional feed before lunch. Polished enough to sound wounded and vague enough to avoid naming me. He wrote about leaving a controlling creative environment, choosing a platform where ideas could breathe, and finding people who respected the future. He never typed Morgan Ellery, but the details were fingerprints. I read it once, then again with Reese on the line, and neither of us spoke until the second paragraph. Grant had mentioned a consumer fraud season, a sponsor category under renewal, and a guest angle that matched episode 6 too closely to be coincidence. He had not revealed the project, but had revealed enough to use private material as proof. Reese kept her voice low when she said, "He is writing like he already owns the next version." And I answered, "Save it before he edits himself cleaner." That was when Lila Hartwell stopped being only a name inside Grant's confession. I knew her from acquisition calls, not late dinners or whatever life he had built beside mine. She was a senior talent booker at a larger audio platform, sharp enough to recognize an unfinished series and ambitious enough to believe Grant when he dressed access as opportunity. But the first email Marin Pike forwarded from her did not sound victorious. It sounded careful. Lila had written through her company account, asking Grant to confirm whether I approved the materials he shared and whether episode 6 was cleared for review. That question changed the room around him, because she was not laughing beside him anymore. She was creating a record. Marin told me, "Do not answer him publicly, and do not correct his post for him. We are sending a legal hold notice and a cease-use letter." She continued, "And his own timeline can do the talking." I looked back at Grant's post, at private information dressed up as freedom, and felt the floor settle. He thought he had started a narrative war, but had given my lawyer a date, a motive, and a witness. Marin Pike did not ask me how angry I was, which was why I liked her. She asked for the operating agreement, the sponsor contracts, the talent releases, the archive policy, and every version of the access log Reese had preserved before Grant could call it a marital misunderstanding. By mid-afternoon, I was sitting at my dining table with legal pads, cold coffee, and a laptop full of receipts that no apology could soften. Marin's voice came through steady as she walked me through it. "This is not about punishing an affair, Morgan. This is about stopping unauthorized use of protected production material. She separated the damage into pieces small enough to hold. The NDA covered sponsor strategy and unreleased show materials. The ownership clause put the series and rough cuts under my company. And the guest releases made episode 6 especially dangerous because final approval had not been signed. Grant could complain about marriage all he wanted, but he could not turn confidential work into a leaving present. Marin put it plainly, "We do not need a non-compete fight when the documents already show ownership, confidentiality, and use restrictions." Reese sent another packet while we were still talking. And the room went quiet for the kind of reason that makes lawyers stop mid-sentence. Grant had opened the share settings for a short window, restored them, then accessed the same folder again through a saved browser session. The move was too careful to be accidental and too sloppy to be invisible. Reese wrote. He tried to make it look untouched. And Marin answered before I could, "Good. Then we preserve both the act and the cleanup." Then Lila's second email arrived, forwarded through Marin, and the whole thing sharpened. She had asked Grant one direct question. Did Morgan sign off on these materials? Yes or no? Grant's reply sat beneath it in plain text, almost bored with its own arrogance. Morgan owns the company. I own the relationships. I read that sentence once and felt something in me go still. Not calm, not healed, just clear enough to stop confusing loss with weakness. Marin told me that line would matter, because it showed he knew the company was mine while still claiming the people around it as his currency. I closed the laptop only after Reese confirmed the legal hold notices were ready. And for the first time, Grant's charm sounded less like power and more like evidence. The settlement meeting happened in Marin Pike's office, not in some glass tower Grant could turn into a stage. I sat beside Marin with Reese Dalton across from me, her folder closed, her face unreadable, and the proof arranged in the order Grant had created it. Grant came in with his divorce attorney and the careful smile he used when he wanted a room to forget what he had not earned. Let us keep this simple. Morgan, he began, because I am willing to walk away clean if you recognize my role. His role, according to him, meant a public co-creator credit, a consulting fee, and the right to call sponsor relationships his independent property. He spoke like a man offering mercy instead of asking to keep a name he had borrowed. Marin let him finish, then placed one thin packet between us and said, "We can talk about divorce after we address unauthorized use of company material." Grant's smile held for half a second, then started working harder than his face could support. Marin opened with the access log, the sponsor packet, the preserved post, and Lila Hartwell's email asking whether I had approved the materials. Grant's attorney leaned closer with every page, and Grant stopped looking at me once the timestamps appeared. "This is being exaggerated," Grant said, but his voice had lost the easy rhythm that carried him through rooms. Marin answered, "The documents do not exaggerate. Grant, they show who touched what, when they touched it, and what they said after." Then she slid forward the final page. The reply he had sent to Lila. Morgan owns the company. I own the relationships. Grant stared at that sentence longer than he stared at the logs, longer than the post, longer than any proof showing what he had taken. That was when I understood what frightened him most. He was not losing a marriage in that room. He was losing the story that made him sound necessary. Marin's voice stayed even as she offered the only path still open. He would sign a settlement confirming he had no ownership claim over the show, archive, brand, or future sponsor deals. He would stop presenting himself as co-creator, return copied material, and leave platform discussions to counsel. Grant looked at his attorney, but the answer was already sitting in the silence between them. I did not speak until he picked up the pen, and then I only said, "You wanted clean." Grant, this is clean. The fallout did not arrive like thunder. It came through inboxes, calendar cancellations, and voices that had suddenly learned to sound careful. Dane Whitlock, the VP of Acquisitions at Lila's platform, sent Marin a formal notice before Grant had even finished pretending the settlement was temporary. The platform was opening an internal review, removing Lila Hartwell from the proposal, and confirming in writing that no materials connected to my unreleased season would be used. It was the kind of message people send when they are not being kind. They are protecting themselves. Lila's name moved through the industry quietly, which was worse than a public scandal, because quiet travels farther in rooms where people remember risk. She had not stolen my work with her own hands, but she had accepted access that came too easily and asked the right question too late. Dane's letter did not call her dishonest, and it did not call Grant anything at all. It only named the materials, the dates, the review process, and the decision to remove her from every conversation involving my company. My main sponsor requested an assurance call that afternoon, and for the first time in years, Grant was not on the invitation. I joined with Reese and Marin. No performance, no shaky apology, no private marriage details laid out for strangers to inspect. I walked them through the timeline, Grant's access, the download logs, the preserved post, the legal hold, and the steps we had already taken to secure every guest release and rough cut. When the sponsor lead finally spoke, all she said was, "Thank you for handling this before it became our problem." That sentence carried more weight than any victory speech could have. Grant had always treated sponsor trust like a room he could charm open, but that room closed without him inside it. By the end of the day, the sponsor stayed. The platform backed away from Grant's pitch, and Reese had a clean chain of custody ready for any follow-up. Nobody needed me to call him a liability. His own trail had already done it. The last signature did not make a sound loud enough for what it ended. Grant signed the settlement, returned the copied material through counsel, and gave up every claim to the show, the archive, the brand, and the future deals he had tried to wrap around his name. He kept what was legally his, because I was not interested in becoming the kind of person who needed more than the truth. What he lost was the part he had been borrowing from me for years, the title, the room, the clean story, and the right to stand beside my work like he had made it. I moved the company into a smaller production space near the edge of Denver, where the windows faced open sky instead of elevators, full of people performing importance. The old office had been designed around Grant's appetite for meetings, introductions, and anyone who would laugh at his jokes before asking who actually made the show. The new one had 2 edit rooms, a locked archive closet, a quiet conference table, and no corner built for a man who needed to be seen. Reese walked through it with a folder under one arm, and when I told her she was becoming head of production operations, she only nodded once and said, "Good. Then we can build it right." Lila's message came through Marin a few days later, short enough to feel real. She did not beg, and she did not turn herself into a victim. She wrote that she had believed Grant because his version benefited her, and by the time she asked the right question, the damage was already in writing. I read it once, then let Marin file it with everything else, because an acknowledgement was useful. But it was not a relationship I needed to reopen. The new season launched with every guest release clean, every sponsor brief updated, and every credit line exactly where it belonged. Executive producer, Morgan Ellery. Head of production operations, Reese Dalton. No Grant Rourke hiding between the names. No borrowed title softened into a courtesy. No quiet compromise left there to keep a man comfortable. When I saw the final credit sheet, I did not smile because he was gone. I smiled because my name no longer had to make room for a lie. A month later, I stood at an audio conference in Boulder and spoke about creator ownership without saying Grant's name once. I talked about archives, contracts, release forms, and the strange peace that comes when your private life stops leaking into your work. Afterward, a producer from Chicago told me, "You made that sound survivable," and I believed her because survival was not the same as bitterness. It was walking back into your own life and realizing the lock still opened for you. I do have peace now, but it is not empty. It has work I respect, people I trust, and a slower kind of love I do not have to perform for. If this story sounds like a room you once stood in, I hope you remember this. Your name belongs on the life you built.